Great. I think we're live. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of the Cross Project Council meeting, OpenJS Foundation. Today is the 1st of February in the year 2022. I think we're going to usurp the agenda today and just kind of dig into the first item on the agenda, which is an issue around security at the OpenJS Foundation. And let me just say that is issue number 826. And I think, this issue was opened by Robin with a good comment by Toby, but I will turn it over to you, Robin, to kick things off.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I opened it, but after many discussions with, I think, all of you throughout the past couple of years, conversations with my colleagues at the Linux Foundation, and then more deeper conversations with Brian Bellendorf and some of the folks affiliated with the Open Source Security Foundation. So I thought we would use this time. It's just sort of the first of many meetings to figure out sort of what are some concrete things that we can do to make a difference, to move the needle, and to bring you all the help that you need and that you all can help each other. So I just threw together a couple of slides just to sort of maybe shape the conversation a little bit. Here we go. Great. Move you all up. So, how many are not? Who is not familiar with the Open Source Security Foundation? I think we all are. They also launched officially a new program today called Alpha Omega. So I would definitely check it out. We retweeted on OpenJS. Alpha Omega is a kind of an additional funding under the Open Source Security Foundation. Alpha is going to be providing additional funds directly for some top key projects. And then Omega will be sort of that long tail. And Omega is essentially kind of going to be kind of a tooling and people who will look at the long tail of like 10,000 projects. Alpha will probably be like the top 100. So just like an FYI, we've had a couple of conversations with the Alpha Omega folks and those leads related to the Node project. They are identifying which priority projects based on the security vulnerability, not the security vulnerability, the criticality scoring, which I've provided a link in the issue. And also Harvard has a study as well where they have identified some key projects. So today I just thought we would sort of start with an open discussion. It's great to have so many different maintainers here and talk about some of the challenges and gaps that you see. Talk about, should we form a security collab space? Who are our security people? Talk about maybe some requirements that we should mandate. We do mandate other things like code of conducts and licenses. Should we look at mandates on security? Ask ourselves, how do we prioritize projects? How can OpenJS support the projects? And then, gosh, if we secure funding, how would we do it? And these are probably working sessions that come out of it, but I thought at least kind of a good start. Any feedback, or should we jump right in to kind of that open discussion?
Do you have the list of what the Linux Foundation is requiring? Or I see it's exploring.
Well,
that.
there isn't really requirements in that space, as Brian Bellendorf said, the philosophy is like, we don't really tell you how to run your projects. It's let 1,000 flowers bloom. I know that, for example, talking to the other executive directors, some do require a number of things. So, those are just decisions I think we need to make as a foundation.
I was just, starting from that. There's a list that some people have already thought is good. That's always a good part for starting point.
Yeah. And on that next slide, I can kind of give a couple of examples. Jordan?
Yeah, I think so I have to step out pretty soon, so it's not 100% relevant to the slide, but I wanted to say that I think that a focus on security is important, and we need to be very careful about the developer experience, because the consumers and maintainers that care about security already are already doing most of the things they need to do. And so we can make their life better, but they they don't need to be persuaded. There's a much larger contingent of maintainers and consumers that may care ideologically, but doesn't actually do anything about it, isn't aware, or isn't willing to deal with the inconvenience of the steps that it requires. And things that improve security but aren't actually convenient enough for the masses to adopt don't actually improve security. So for example, there was recently this giveaway where they sent out these security keys to like prolific open source projects. So I have 2 of them right here. And I tried to set them up, and in the process realized it's much more convenient for me to use Touch ID on my laptop than to use the security keys for GitHub. So the security keys don't actually do anything for me. And because I use my mobile devices, the security keys don't work well there because I have iOS devices. And so they also don't do anything good for me there. So like, I'm still using the same like Google Authenticator style approach that I've been using, which is perfectly secure, not quite as secure as hardware keys, but like, that's a sort of
Real
DX
world.
gap. Yeah, it's like my real world experience with that, right? And the and like yeah, the keys are NFC, so they're theoretically supposed to work with mobile devices, but the Google app for setting that up crashes every time I try, and you know, I couldn't get it working, and I already have something working that's 2 factors, so it's like a highly motivated package maintainer who understands security. I wasn't able to really do anything useful with these keys yet. I'm hopeful that I'll still figure it out, but in general, I think like I've had a lot of discussions with folks about package signing, and you know, all of the high profile incidents in the NPM ecosystem were about people with legitimate access doing something unacceptable. Package signing doesn't help you there. So like efforts to improve package signing, like that's just security theater. It's not actually going to make things better, even though package signing is good, right? And so like similarly, I think we need to have a very critical eye with all of the things we try to do, because things that solve theoretical problems are irrelevant if they're not solving actually exploited problems. And those are what I hope we focus on. That's my little rant.
Great. Toby, I think you were next.
Right, but I think Miles probably wants to address what Jordan said here.
Oh,
and I
perhaps,
don't.
yeah.
Yeah, so just like really quickly on the keys, I think those are all really interesting points. There's this like catch-22 with it where like you want to make onboarding way better, and that's actually something I've personally been thinking a lot about as we've been rebuilding how we enroll folks in 2FA for NPM. But there now becomes this point of diminishing returns where if you like make it so easy to set it up that people don't think twice about it, and then they lose it and they're locked out of their account, it's like that much harder to restore their account access. This is more like, you know, just thinking out loud, but those are kind of, I guess, like interesting platform problems that need to be solved at the same time, where we continue to make it easier to use 2FA devices while also, you know, not making it easier for you to completely lose access to your account, which is an outcome that no one wants to see happen.
Yeah, so the only thing I wanted to say was that I think that the CNCF actually has some security requirements for different project levels. Somewhere, I couldn't find them.
They have
But I
CI, they have
remember seeing them.
CII. Yeah, they have the CII badging requirements for graduation.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a good point. Cool. Great. Any other sort of challenges and gaps that we have as project maintainers?
I think it's, I can always throw in the, you know, if it's going to take more work, where does that work come from? You know, it's, I don't think if we just end up saying, hey, projects, you need to do X, that's not going to be terribly successful. If we can come and say, hey, projects, we think this is important, and here's how we're helping you do X, we'll be more successful. You know, for example, you know, if we want to have, you know, make sure that every project has a way that vulnerabilities can be reported, what can we do to make that easier for projects? Do we act as the front door for that in some cases or whatever? But like that's the kind of thing where, as opposed to just saying you must do this, figuring out what we can do as a foundation, I think will make it more effective and hopefully, have the uptake work out better. But that, of course, will take people and time. So it's like you said, if we get funding, that can help in that side of things.
Emily?
Yeah, kind of effectively going on from what Michael said there, in that the biggest thing we are missing is really always time and people, and to some level possibly expertise as well, because security isn't something that everyone just knows how to do kind of out of the box, but it is a field where I think in particular it would be valuable if we could offer actual human assistance to individual projects, for example, in the shape of a security-focused code review or something like this. So not just providing tools and guidelines and requirements, but actual directed human assistance. That I believe could have a real-world impact, and I, at least as a project maintainer, a small project maintainer, would highly value help like that.
Yeah, agreed. Toby?
Yeah, on this front, I'd like to suggest, and sort of like building on what Michael was saying, one of the things that we do for code of conducts is we let projects decide that they want to implement their own escalation mechanism, etc., or they can just rely on the foundation providing this. And this could be something that would work for security, for declaring security issues, right? It could be something that could happen at the foundation level somehow, not only at the project level. It was a similar mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great idea.
I think we'd have to plan for a little bit more resource, because luckily on the code of conduct, it's fairly infrequent, but otherwise, yeah, that's a good example of that kind of model.
Jordan?
Yeah, just another thing to add here is that the security implications of a single unfunded maintainer of packages should probably not be understated. And simply vomiting money at a project does not solve that problem. But virtually no companies have actually tried that solution yet either. So yeah, I think any company who claims to care about security and isn't putting at least a single-digit percentage of their revenue towards their open source dependencies doesn't actually care about security. So I really hope that that we also account for that in any recommendations we make.
Good point.
I guess related to that is also helping to surface that information so that it's obvious who is speaking with their actions versus asking for, asking other people to do work versus actually helping to do the work. If we can help surface and make that very clear, I think that will hopefully help motivate more companies to say, well, I guess we better be doing our part.
I like it. Toby, you had something else? Raise your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can't. The sustainability question, we need to address. We can sort of dance around this for another couple of years, but like what we're seeing in open source right now is literally not sustainable, and we have to really start thinking about solving this at a systems level, right? Not just sort of like scotch taping things on top, but actually really trying to understand the underlying dynamics and actually doing something about them. I think it's really important. This is like the only way we're going to be able to build something sustainable, long-term, and solid, right? So I think it's good that we have stopgap solutions, but it's also good that we think about how can we handle this more deeply. And I think the foundation can decide to be at the forefront of this, or sort of like lag behind and play catch up. And it's kind of like a decision that we have to make. But I think we should address this question and decide, if this is something that we want to drive, or if this is something that we want to watch and then jump on the right train.
I was just going to ask a quick follow-up. When you talk about underlying dynamics, what are you thinking, Toby?
So, I mean, broadly, like, what Jordan was saying, like a one maintainer project is a one maintainer project. Like that's extremely fragile on the whole different, on the whole set of different perspectives, right? And we have to figure out what that means and what can we do about it, right? And so, right now, as people were saying before, like the smallest solutions that we've had, the biggest solution so far is throw a tiny bit of money at some projects to see what happens, right? And the way this has worked so far is essentially that tiny bit of money has gone to new features, right? And so, before we had one maintainer maintaining N features, and after sponsoring, you have one maintainer still not paying, maintaining N+1 features, right? And so we're making the problem worse, not better. And yet the problem is real. Like this problem is real. We're essentially building on infrastructure that is maintained by, in lots of cases, volunteers, unpaid volunteers, right? And that is a problem. There's not one solution to this. There are multiple things that we can try to do. And like I just sincerely believe that is not sustainable. Like it's not something we can just brush off. And I think that's what I want to mean. That's what I mean by like it's a systemic problem. We can sort of like delay the point at which we take action, but some form of action will need to be taken, because literally like security problems will continue with all of these projects, and we continue relying on these projects. So either we change our practices around using lots of dependencies and we start relying on less dependencies and take back in-house all of the different organizations, things like color.js or other sort of like all of these small packages, right? Or they become part of maybe a standards library that is maintained in a different way, or we find a way to fund these, or to at least make those more sustainable.
Interesting. Sarah?
The question I have, I think we've all kind of like elucidated the problem and that it's a huge problem. I think that is accurate. No one's disputing it. That's what I'm saying. A question I have is, can we do this well? Like, are we the ones to do this well? And by having our own solution, or does this look like we can best empower? Because like the worst case scenario, I think there's two like worst case scenarios. Is like we try to put something up together, try to help, and then it's kind of like security theater, or it's just like it actually doesn't help. Another scenario is, remember when OpenJS went full on into security? That was weird. But like there's probably beneficial, but it's hard to prove sometimes. Is the best way we can set our maintainers up for success and project owners up for success is by facilitating the conversations that that would help them with the organizations that would help them the best. Those are questions I don't have answers for.
I guess if I understood your question, is this a problem that should be solved at the OpenJS Foundation level, or is it something that's like broader, that like the Linux Foundation would be, we're not necessarily part of it, but like that's a broader thing that would cover it for a larger space. And then you could imagine like there could be another level where it's like even broader than that. But I think that's a good question as to what does it make sense to do within our scope on our own versus, and maybe that's back to Toby's comment too, like, do we lead or do we follow? And, it's what does it actually make sense to do in our scope on our own versus participating with other groups that are doing it across the, we're not the only, JavaScript isn't the only open source. There's tons of open source out there that has a similar issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. And not just like horizontal space of should it be broader, but also like who is doing this have more expertise than we do. Because I can only speak for myself when I say that I understand security. I'm not the person to that you want to trust with securing all of, making sure that all of our projects have the tools they need to be successful there. So we may have those people on the CPC or on the board, and that would be great. But there's definitely organizations that have probably more expertise.
I should have raised my hand. I'm sorry to just jump in here real quickly, Toby. My thinking with this is that, you know, we're a part of the Linux Foundation family, and I imagine, you know, this will be like sort of a multi-pronged approach, and we're just starting to figure out what makes sense for us and our projects and maintainers and community, and hopefully we'll work in concert with them to you know, figure things out, but also potentially funding and infrastructure and all those kinds of things. So that's my hope, just to kind of comment on your question.
Yeah, I agree. Mhm.
Yeah, very briefly on before, because I spoke a lot before, on what Sarah said. I think what's really important is there's a security question. I mean, there's a security problem and there's a sustainability problem, and these two things are related. And you can't treat the security problem long-term without addressing the sustainability problem. But we also want to treat them as, they're tied, but we also want to treat them as separate things. They probably will require different kinds of answers coming from different places at perhaps different levels, even if they're connected.
Miles?
I think that this is, you know, something that was being discussed at a high level. You know, we have projects and we have volunteers, and I think that there is a conflict here whereby, like, you know, we want to support the people who are coming in and want to volunteer. We don't want to like replace the work that volunteers are doing or make it feel like they're not, that work is not valuable. Now, at the same time, there is a conflict here where, like, you know, at its core, these projects are in our foundation is about JavaScript. Our core mission is not about security. Well, security is part of, like, we care about things being secure in the same way that our core mission isn't like scalable build infrastructure or amazing release processes. And I say this particularly because there's a lot of these things that become part of overall maintenance of a project that, you know, can bring in a whole bunch of different types of volunteers, which is awesome, but don't necessarily match clearly to the expertise or skills of like the core group of people that we're talking about working with. In the organization that I work with, we have a security team, and at GitHub, when vulnerabilities are, you know, reported, that team is responsible for triaging them, bringing them to the engineering team, working with the engineering team to determine what an actual solution looks like, vetting the potential solution that the engineering team comes up with, looking and thinking about analysis to make sure that like these things are not reproduced and we like really truly patch it. And then if needed, work with the engineering team on the solution if there are some gaps in the team's expertise on this. We've been seeing some of this with the work that we've been doing in Node with Trail of Bits that has been awesome, and I would love to see if there's ways that we could reproduce this. And this is not to say that I want to replace this expertise or these volunteer roles within organizations or projects, but, you know, there are experts. And I would even go a step further when we talk about like sustainable open source and the role of the foundation. A foundation offering these kinds of resources to projects seems like a great use of the foundation's funds and part of our mission. And when we talk about finding people who can do these roles, if there's ways that we can support companies that employ people that work on our projects or are involved in our ecosystem, that's even better. That's a great way of kind of like sustaining the people who care and work on our stuff. And these are the kind of interesting relationships that I think are worth exploring. And, you know, something that Toby mentioned earlier is, you know, sustenance of a maintainer is very different than the sustainability of the project. And I would argue at times, sometimes they can be in conflict with each other. When you're raising money for a project as an individual, that money is going to first go to pay for like food on your table. And that's absolutely and perfectly reasonable. And I see our role as a foundation and the structure that we have, which is slightly different, is to make these kinds of like table stakes things to be that organization. It's as if all of these projects are existing in a larger company. Like, what's the structure that you would have on an engineering team inside of a Fortune 500 company to make you just like the best possible engineer that you could be, so you could focus on your core mission and ship the things that you care about? And I think that it's our goal as a foundation to create those similar kind of structures for our volunteers and those working on our projects.
Emily.
Been thinking here about the question of whether we want to be leading or be following, and the discussion around that and the sustainability. And I think honestly, this is really skirting or sort of talking around possibly much more significant question of do we have interest in finding ways of the foundation funding projects or individuals working on projects, and whether that is specifically about security or sustainability or anything else is a little bit of a side question, when I think the sort of big elephant question here is this a direction in which we want to go? And that kind of, I think, leads to a lot of answers to other questions that we've been asking here. I don't presume that we can, have an answer to this right away, but I think that is a discussion we ought to have at some point.
Yeah, and I guess in this context, does the answer to that depend on the work being done? Because there's sort of the general, hey, we'll just fund people to do anything. And then separately, you could say, well, there's some poor things that, the foundation and or its sponsor members believe need to be done, and they'll fund those versus feature X or whatever, right?
Yeah, as in my thinking, right now, we can only ask that projects and project maintainers do certain things. But if we are in a position of actually offering them money or funds or otherwise, we have a situation, whatever the terminology ends up with, that we may have an obligation on behalf of the people working on the projects to do the things that we strongly believe that they ought to be doing.
Right, and the model, yeah, because that's interesting. That's like there's different models for achieving that end. There's like funding people to do specific work. There's funding just general maintainers so that it's part of their work. And I think there's probably a few others we could think of. But yeah, figuring out what model we think is going to work the best is interesting.
Toby?
Yeah, I mean, I was along the lines of what Michael was saying, that and to Miles' earlier point, there are multiple ways of doing this, right? One way, as Miles put it, is actually to have companies that are that rely on this on all of these projects to fund their maintenance and support through their own employees being dedicated either full-time or part-time to working on these projects. And that's one solution, for example, that doesn't require anything specific from the foundation, except sort of like guidance and direction as to what projects needs what, but doesn't require like, for example, like payroll of developers or anything of that sort. And then there are completely different options where a payroll part of some contracting work for specific maintenance of specific project would require either some form of perhaps legal change at the foundation level, or relying on some service providers that are increasingly used for remote work nowadays, for example. So I think like all of these options, or there's lots of options, but to Emily, to your point, well, rather as a counterpoint to your point, I think we need first to decide whether we care about this and we care to drive this, or whether, and then we can secondly sort of like figure out, okay, how do we do it? What's feasible? What's complicated to put in place? What are the low-hanging fruits that we can sort of rely on first? So I think we should really first decide whether we believe that this is our role. And then if we do, try to figure out what solutions we can use and which are the ones we can start with.
Emily?
Had one more thought, specifically, I mean, harking back to the Log4j and having seen some basically messages being shared by open source developers that had big corporations reach out to them and ask or demand responses for them about Log4j vulnerabilities and work around this. And some of the responses there were effectively realistically saying, yeah, sure, I'll answer you, once we sort out a support contract. And that got me thinking that I would be very happy if there was a framework or a way of somehow me offering a support contract for the open source work that I do for parties that are interested in that, had terms and shape of a contract like this that would protect my interest and be sensible. But I don't know any such thing exists. Something like this, I could imagine something like this, an entity like the foundation could even help with.
Right, little LLC business, perhaps. Interesting thought. We have
Guess just
about 9 minutes. Yeah, I love
tiny,
this discussion.
tiny
Keep going.
caveat
Go.
to that, and then I'll
Mhm.
stop. I do wonder if, and maybe this is something that we could explore, would be what can we do to help our maintainers who are interested in creating their own businesses that could focus on these kinds of services be successful. The LF has worked with many vendors in this space, and there's probably mentor programs that we could set up. Maybe I think there starts to become maybe a conflict of interest when it gets to the we can tell you what accountant to use, but we thankfully have lawyers that we could talk to help figure that out. But that could be a really, really interesting thing that we could offer as a foundation, would be helping people bootstrap businesses that are focused on services for open source and our own projects.
Yeah, like a partner program. I love it. Boy, I'm just gonna quickly share with you some of the, looks like some of this is being managed. Here's some things to think about for suggesting mandates to our projects. Two-factor authentication, it looks like a lot of that is happening already. Jordan gave some great feedback though. Establishing a mailing list dedicated to reporting security issues. I know this is mandated at the LFAI Foundation. We talked about the CCI or the CII badge, which is now the Open Source Security Foundation Security Badge rebranded. That is a requirement at CNCF. And then some of these others are recommendations, like the SBOMs and the trainings. Just touching on those things. So something to maybe noodle on for a follow-up discussion. I also just wanted to sort of flag, and I'm going to bring Schubert in to give a demo. He had touched on this in our last CPC meeting about the Lfx Security Tool. It's a dashboard provided by the Linux Foundation. You need to have a Linux Foundation ID, which I think many of you already do because you're on our mailing list. But if you don't, it's really easy to do that. And if we want to bring Shubra back, he can give a little demo on the Lfx security. And that's essentially a dashboard powered by some other companies like Sneak and Blue Bracket. So easy way to get our projects on board so they have greater visibility. It's very tightly access controlled. So that's something that we can roll out to the projects. So just touching on that, we have about 5 minutes thinking about where do we want to take next steps. So much good stuff covered, and I took a lot of written notes. I'll recap those in the typed notes.
It's like, are there basically 0 to low effort recommendations that we think
Yeah.
are worth, figuring out how to enable projects to do. So for example, the one on turning on 2FA, right? Like if we understood what stops projects from turning that on, and, is there work? Like that's one where it seems to me like, at least for me, that's not a huge amount of extra effort for our project. Now, maybe there's reasons that I don't understand. So like, that's something that I could say, oh, maybe we can be successful there. The one about like, here's some training courses, it's kind of like, now, how would I make the case that they want to be interested? Like you're basically saying, go spend a bunch of time to be interested in the stuff we're interested in. So I guess what I'm saying is like, can we focus on a few solid things, which are like, we're not asking the developers to spend a bunch of extra time or be interested in security, but are actually they can do easily and we'll move the sticks forward. That would be a good way to start, right?
Yeah. If you hear Brian Bellendorf present about OpenSSF, he'll say the relevant training at the LF would have, had the project maintainers gone through that and passed, they may have caught the issue. So
I still go back to like, I work at a large company. I have to take those courses every single year. I have yet to find anybody who looks forward to that or says, yeah, I learned a lot of stuff, right? So like,
well, that's fair.
It's the, like, let's start with the ones we think are low overhead and likely to say, yeah, oh yeah, that, 2FA totally makes sense and it's not that much work. So, and we get a big return on that, I think, right? Like,
I feel like we should have some sort of brainstorming session, for lack of a better term, and figure out the variety of problems we want to try to solve and the variety of things that we could offer, and then we can find, like you're saying, Michael, the low-hanging fruit, the things that are obvious that aren't that have impact but aren't too disruptive, but also allow us to think about bigger picture things and start to, perhaps collaborate with other foundations or start to develop other resources or things like that. If we could, just get a list of what things we're thinking about and we can start to work on them.
Yeah, definitely a brainstorm on biggest return versus investment things would be interesting.
Yeah. Toby?
Yeah, Miles talked earlier about supporting projects. What can the foundation do to support? And I really like that mindset, right? And I'm wondering, could we ask the projects what they would need, or what the foundation could help them with in that space?
Yeah,
We should.
yeah. We'll do it. Yeah, again, I think this is just, one of many conversations. I want to be really pragmatic about it, baby steps. I don't want to boil the ocean, but I don't want to do nothing. And even like asking for grants or money, you need to have something concrete to fund. And right now, I don't feel like we have anything cohesive enough for a recommendation to ask. We have at the project level a little bit in conversations with the Node project, but collectively on how we help the broader OpenJS Foundation, we haven't quite got that.
So should we try to, I was going to say, should we try to book something or use the CPC working session or what should be next steps?
Yeah, absolutely. I know we have some security folks as well who couldn't make it today. We can invite them, make it time zone friendly for them to join. I know this is a hard one. Okay.
Should we create a security Slack channel? Should we just talk a little bit? Yeah.
Security Slack. We have our working sessions pretty mapped out, I think, for the next two, maybe a separate working group.
I agree. Just a different meeting time, something to, I hate booking meetings, but it seems like it would make sense for us to just try to find some time to get together.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any way, like maybe that brainstorm is a good starting point for our group, but I think key to in my mind is bringing new people who are going to help make this happen and provide more horsepower and provide resources and as Sarah mentioned, have the expertise and have the interest. that's going to be a key part of, like, in terms of making progress. How do we bring together not just our existing people, but other people to make a difference?
Yeah, and are those people organizing under OpenSSF, or should they be organizing under foundations like ours for JavaScript?
Yes,
Yeah, good question.
The latter, or yes, a good question.
yes, both, I would say.
Yes, both. Cool. Great.
Which makes me wonder, is this something that we should consider a collab space, and try to even just invite folks from the community to get involved and whatnot.
I'm seeing a few head nods. Thumbs up.
Yeah, I definitely think it needs to be broader than just CPC. So that's one of our well-documented channels to do that.
We need a champion, so we'll work on that. Recruit collab space champion. Okay. Cool. Good, a lot covered.
Yep.
Top of the hour.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. I think it was a
Yeah.
good session, just getting things started. So I look forward to more. Robin and I will probably work on this some. We'll send messages in Slack, open up Slack channels, look at a collab space and try to get things rolling.
Yeah. And thank you to our special guests. It's lovely to see you. Board friends.
Loves.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Cheers,
Bye.
y'all.
Mhm.